Hello and welcome back to the channel. So the watch brand in question today seems to have gone from strength to strength and have built a really solid reputation amongst enthusiasts since they were launched in 2015. The brand I'm talking about today is Farer. Now they are a British brand, although the watches are assembled in Switzerland. But despite me being British, that's not why I'm interested in them. It's always their use of colour that's really inspired me, and on multiple occasions in the last few years I've had an itchy trigger finger to try and purchase one of these watches, and I've never quite clicked buy. Until now, that is. When I saw the watch today, it was one of those ones I was thinking about night after night and I just could not get it out of my head. So does today's watch live up to the positive press, or am I going to be somewhat disappointed? Let's get stuck in to the Farer Portobello Chronograph. So as always, some specs first. This is a 38.5mm diameter chronograph. It's 13.9mm thick, and that includes the box crystal on the top there. The lug to lug is 43.7mm and it's a 20mm lug width, so pretty good for strap changes. The case is 316L steel and there is a mix of brushing and polishing. The movement on this one is a Sellita SW510MB. Bit of a mouthful, but this is a hand-wound Swiss chronograph movement, and it gives you the 3 subdials. These are the running seconds on the left-hand side, a 12-hour counter at the 6 o'clock, and on the right-hand side there you've got a 30-minute counter. This movement has a 63-hour power reserve, and it runs at 28,800 vibrations per hour. So for what it's worth, the seconds hand is very smooth, but when you've got such a small running seconds, I don't really think it makes too much difference anyway. Let's talk colours and let's talk design on this one, because that is ultimately why I bought the watch. The vivid, bold and contrasting colours on this watch are inspired by Portobello Road in London, and I lived in London for a period of time, and there are very vivid colours on all of the buildings, and it makes it very unique in London for that aspect. Not only do I love the way Farer have integrated this design inspiration into a watch in such an elegant way, but also for me personally, I have lots of fond memories of my time in London, and it remains one of my favourite cities in the world. So I think that gives me a little bit of extra enjoyment with this watch, and particularly with this colourway. It is a very deep blue on the dial, and in darker lights you don't really pick up the details, but it really comes alive in brighter lights and outdoors. And that's where you'll also see that very intriguing waffle pattern, which works well overall with the design aesthetic. The first bit of major contrast that you'll see is that white ring right around the edge of the dial, which has the minute scale on it. Now it's not particularly legible as a minute scale because the box crystal tends to distort right around this kind of area. However, I think it was chosen here more for what it offers in terms of the colorway rather than the functionality. The white on this minute scale also matches the white of the chronograph hands, and I don't know if it's really a negative or a positive, but it's something to bear in mind, is that when you glance at this watch, it's the chronograph hand and the subdial hands with that white that stands out more immediately than the hour and the minute hand. It's not that the hour and the minute hand are not visible, but because they're tapered, high polished baton style hands, it takes an extra, I would say, second or so of looking at the watch to see the time rather than the timing function. Dial text isn't overbearing. You've got the Farer Universal logo, of course, Swiss made at the 6 o'clock, and chronograph curved around the 6 o'clock subdial just below the pinion. Now for me, the stroke of genius in this watch is the orange bezel, and the fact that the shade that they've chosen for this orange bezel is absolutely perfect as a match with the blue. Now I understand from doing my research that Farer did prototype quite a few different shades to find this as the perfect match, and I think it shows. It's such an interesting addition, and it makes the colorway. It makes the watch for me so visually interesting, so appealing, so very unique and distinctive. For me, this is very much a special piece in my collection. This is not something that I'll be using and abusing every day. You absolutely could, but for me it's not. And it helps that it's not overly sporty or overly dressy. It seems to have a very nice balance, despite having bright, vivid, contrasting colours, which I think is exceptionally difficult to achieve in design. On the bezel, there is a 12-hour scale, so you can effectively set a second time zone, and it is of course bidirectional with an exceptional bezel action. Something to note on the subdials, which might not be immediately obvious, is that there is grooves in them like a vinyl record, which again is more interesting texture and something that Farer does so fantastically well. Texture and colour. I think that's what this brand is really all about, and it's when they're at their best, when they're using both to the max. In terms of the case, it's a mixture of brushing and polishing, as I mentioned earlier. It's the chamfers on the lugs that are the high polish areas, and these are slightly twisted, which gives them a very nice profile, and the definition is very good between the brushed and the polished surfaces, as you would expect for the price, and zero complaints about the brushing as well. It's very high quality, very fine, and silky smooth to the touch. The case back is an open sapphire. What's nice with this case back is that Farer have given you something to look at. They have their own plate over the top, which is really nicely engraved, and you'll also see there is blued screws across the movement and a little bit of perlage work. This is what I like to see with an open case back, something that is at least decorated in some way. Operating the chronograph feels pretty much like any other mechanical chronograph I've ever operated. They are firm, notchy, mechanical clicks, and as we're talking about interactions with the watch, this is hand wound like I mentioned, and it winds smoothly, it feels nice, and on the crown, have a little look, you'll see there is a brass cap. That's one of Farer's signature design elements that you'll find across the range, and it's nice to see the consistency. I think it's the sign of a mature brand when you can identify these little things. It's also a good demonstration of their attention to detail. Now, there is loads of different options for straps with these on the website when you go to purchase one. I chose mine with the leather. I'm probably going to have some fun playing around with this with some different options in the future and seeing what works best. Now, despite this being a relatively compact chronograph, there is lume plots. The indices are applied and they're polished, and because the polishing is very good on these applied indices, it means sometimes in direct sunlight the watch effectively shimmers. Now, by the time I upload this video, the watch may or may not have sold out, and you might think, well, why should I bother watching the rest of the video if it has? First of all, I think it gives a good indication of where Farer is at as a brand, and secondly, they have a habit of continually releasing new and interesting colorways in their existing designs. So even if this one is sold out, I'm sure other chronographs in exactly the same style, but perhaps in a different colorway, will be available. And if you're looking at one of those, again, this review should be a good reference with you. And finally, if you are enjoying the video, I'd really appreciate it if you like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon. It really helps the channel, and I thank you so much. What's impressive with this watch is that they have put a decent number of layers of superluminova on the indices, and it punches way above its weight in terms of being a chronograph with really small lume plots. Although this is not a lighthouse on a dark night in a stormy sea, what it is proof that you don't need massive lume plots to get pretty decent lume. You just need to make the effort to layer them on top of each other. What happened to the number 4 and the number 7? Let's come back to that. Because it's a hand-wound movement, you really do need to wind up every day to maintain the accuracy. Although it has this 63-hour power reserve, if you let it wind down and you don't touch it for well over 24 hours, it starts to lose quite a bit of accuracy. Accuracy out the box is really good, and I do believe Farer check this when they assemble the watches and regulate it if they need to. The biggest positive for me, as you can probably guess, is the use of colour and the texture. I think this is a stunning watch, and I think it is designed at its highest level, and I have to commend Farer for that. It's the reason I bought the watch. I fell in love with the looks, and it looks even better in real life than it did on YouTube videos and on their website. So that is testimony to them. Second point is the build quality is fantastic. It feels rock solid. It's compact, yes, 38.5mm, but it has a good weight, it has a good heft. It feels substantial. Nothing on it is loose, nothing on it is rattly. The tolerances are excellent. Like I said, the bezel insert is superb. It's been really well engineered and it feels better than its price point. Another positive has to be the finishing. Whether I'm looking head on at the dial and the handset, or whether I'm examining the brushwork and polishing on the case, again, it really is top drawer. I can't find any issues at all with the finishing. And I think the movement choice was perfect. I think if you had the extra chunkiness and thickness that comes with an automatic movement, I think 38.5mm would be out of proportion. So I think to manufacture a watch in this diameter, going hand wound was correct, and a trusted and proven brand like Sellita is definitely a positive for us as watch collectors. You might have guessed I like this watch a lot, but there is drawbacks, so let's go into them. The first one is the chronograph hand on my example is ever so slightly off center. It is marginal in the sense that it's a hair off, a tiny amount, but I can spot it if I look top down on the watch for any period of time. It's not far enough out of alignment that I would bother sending the watch back, or something that's going to really bug me day to day, but it's definitely there, and I bet if this was a review unit, it probably wouldn't be there. So earlier on in the lume comparison, you might have noticed the number 4 and the number 7 seem to fade abnormally quickly on this watch. So what I did was I wanted to test it and see if it was an issue or if I just hadn't lumed it properly with my UV flashlight. So I've been back, I've given it a lot of lume, as much as I possibly can, and although of course the ceramic bezel always does tend to fade a little bit quicker, in fact a lot quicker than the indices, in this case the number 4 wasn't an issue second time around, but that number 7 is still fading a lot quicker than the rest of the bezel insert. It always looks worse on camera, and the number 7 is still visible actually to the naked eye. But yes, there is something uneven with the lume application here, so it's worth pointing out it definitely fades quicker than the rest of the numbers on that bezel insert. My next disappointment with this watch is the leather strap. I was expecting something that might be a little bit softer. I've been wearing it now for a couple of weeks and it hasn't really softened up enough, especially where it has a little bit more thickness close to the watch case. I'm not sure if that's because it's got this thick rubber coating which obviously extends the life and protects it against water ingress, but although it feels very durable, I just don't find it particularly comfortable. And the final point for me, I think as it's a hand wound movement, the crown could just be a little tiny bit bigger as I'm winding it every day. Anyway, with all that said and done, let's come to a conclusion on this Farer Portobello Chronograph.
Yes or no, this is your last chance, no beating around the bush.
So this is my second attempt at recording the conclusions to this video, and that's primarily because the first attempt I didn't know about the fast fading number 7 on the ceramic bezel insert. Now it doesn't change really how I feel about the watch. To be totally honest, I really love it, I don't want to sell it, and I still think it's a very special piece in my collection. But having a couple of, albeit very small, QC issues, I think because of the elevated price of these watches, I'm quite right to be a little bit picky, to point them out, and to say that as much as I love this watch, and as much as I really have enjoyed this Farer, there is just a niggling question in the back of my head, which is about Farer's QC and what other small niggling issues are on other production models. So for that, I would really like to hear in the comments if anybody else has found any minor or major QC issues with Farer, or if perhaps the two small faults, the misaligned hand and the uneven lume on the bezel insert, are unique to me, and perhaps I've just been a little bit unlucky. After all, if you do produce enough watches, there will be some that go out with some minor issues. But that said, at this price point, I think it's okay to expect the watch to be perfect. As I said, please feel free, fill the comments, let me know if you don't own this watch and if you have never had a Farer, exactly what your thoughts are, and if you do, if you've had any issues, how you're finding your watch. And yeah, I will try, as always, to reply to as many as I can. Thank you so much for watching, it's much appreciated, and hopefully I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.